Hello, welcome everyone to our second webinar in our Future Threads series. My name is Marcy O'Malley and I'll be serving as your moderator today. Before we dive in, I want to spend a few minutes on a quick overview of this webinar series before I introduce today's panelists. I'll give them each a chance to share their opinions on our topic, and then we'll conclude with questions and answers. So the purpose of this webinar series is to explore grand challenges for assistive fabric-based wearable devices across a number of different domains, including movement assistance, rehabilitation, training, worker safety, sports and space exploration, and other high-performance environments. So we recognize that this is a really challenging goal to imagine sort of next-generation fabrics that can assist and augment our performance. Recently, a group of researchers from a few different universities got together to discuss this idea of next-generation smart fabrics that don't really exist yet. As a result of our initial discussions, we decided to put together this webinar series to bring together experts from all over the country and the world, folks from academia and industry, and with expertise in all areas kind of touched by this topic. Really to discuss the potential for assistive fabrics and wearables. Some of the questions that we've posed to our panelists include things like, what do you see as the important challenges in this field? What are the key applications where we should target such fabrics and textiles? And what are the considerations that we need to address to really realize these potentials? So we've also asked them to discuss maybe their own technologies or expertise and their perspective on these topics. Throughout this webinar series, we're going to have these thought leaders and various stakeholders explore the potential for these advanced technologies, textiles, and fabrics that could be used to really revolutionize wearables in the future. Today's webinar is the second in our series. Our first webinar took place last Friday on April 11th. And it was focused on rehabilitation and movement assistance and aging in place and some other related kinds of applications. Today's webinar is focused more on applications related to the future of work, so things like physical labor, workplace, safety, accomplishing skilled tasks, and how these wearables might help in these domains. And it doesn't stop there. Next week, we have the third webinar in our series on Friday, April 25th. That one will be focused on sports and extreme levels of performance and special skills related to movement. Throughout the webinar, you'll be provided with a link where you can access the archives of this series, see the recordings, and register for future webinars. You'll also have an opportunity to fill out a form that will enable you to continue the discussion with our organizers and panelists, all available at the link that's in the chat. So let's get started on today's topic. And now I have to do some screen sharing myself. So in this slide, you can see some, make sure I'm not covering anything up, right? You can see some brief bios for each of today's panelists. Once we get rolling, I'll give a longer introduction of each speaker, and then they'll give some short presentations with or without slides, and then we'll do some questions and answers. I do have some prepared questions for our panelists, and then we'll also be able to take questions from the audience. So if you're watching live online, please use the, please use the Q&A function to post your questions. So to quickly introduce this topic, the webinar series is called Future Threads, Pioneering Assistive Fabrics for Movement, Training, and Performance. And I'll be serving as your moderator today, as I said. My name is Marcy O'Malley, and I'm the Thomas Michael Panos Family Professor, and I currently serve as Department Chair for Mechanical Engineering at Rice University in Houston, Texas. I'm active in Rice's neuroengineering and digital health initiatives, and in collaborations with the Texas Medical Center, which we're fortunate to have across the street from our campus. We've got 4 speakers for you today on the panel. In order, they will be Rachel Granberry, Mark Stroley, Alan Asbeck, and Diana Wagner-Elenoff. I'm going to now stop sharing so that Rachel can get ready. There's your cue, Rachel. And I'll use this opportunity to give her a longer introduction. So Rachel Granberry is a research scientist at Meta in Redmond, Washington, where she develops haptic gloves and wrist-based wearables for the future of interaction in augmented and virtual reality. She's worked with teams to unlock on-body performance across a range of wearable devices, including wearable robotics and passive assistive devices at the Wyss Institute at Harvard, and dynamic compression devices at the University of Minnesota in partnership with NASA. Rachel, thanks so much for joining us today. We're really excited to hear your perspectives on this topic and what's important to you. And yeah, please aim for about 5 minutes with your comments.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. So I've been with Meta for almost 4 years and work with widely interdisciplinary teams on next generation computing platforms. Some wearables that our team have developed include EMG-based wristbands that can be paired with AR glasses to enable wearables wearers to communicate with low friction input. So things like just like moving your fingers very slightly. Our group also has developed haptic gloves that bring a rich sense of touch to the virtual world. So haptic gloves, which are textile-based, are definitely useful for virtual and augmented reality, allowing wearers to feel and interact with virtual objects. But they also offer opportunities in a wide range of other fields, including medicine and aerospace. And when I think about grand challenges with textile-based wearables, I think about unsolved system design and integration challenges. For gloves and wrist-based wearables, we want to enable really natural interactions where the devices are only enhancing our experiences. And that means that devices can't be distracting, right? So these devices need to be comfortable, light, flexible, and mechanically coupled in a really natural feeling way to the body. In other words, a really heavy, bulky, and restrictive glove or wristband that causes discomfort pulls people out of experiences, whether that's their physical experiences or experiences in the digital world. So to engineer devices that seamlessly couple to the wearer, we need to start designing devices differently. And this is where I believe that smart textiles have a real advantage. Miniaturizing sensors and actuators does allow them to more easily be attached to the body with compliant fabrics, but we hit limits with this, what I call like an attachment strategy, when the functional density requirements of our devices start to increase. So you can imagine a textile-based glove is still wearable if we attach one miniaturized motor to the hand. But if we want to scale up to, let's say, thousands, there's no longer room for the textiles to do their job. The full device in aggregate is no longer soft and compliant. So if we want to push the bounds of textile-based wearables for these future devices, we need to start inventing new soft technologies. So sensors, actuators, electrical components that are not only flexible, but in many cases stretchable like textiles to conform around compound curvatures and different body shapes and sizes. This is, I think, a reframing of the integration problem. So rather than looking only to the textiles to make a technology wearable, we need to start interrogating the mechanical properties of these technologies themselves, right? So how can we make sensors and actuators themselves more garment-like so that we can pack more functionality into smaller form factor wearable devices? The other grand challenge with textile-based wearables is population coverage, which is a pretty major barrier to market viability. The way we design a wearable device as a one-off demonstration is not usually the way that we would design a wearable device to accommodate, let's say, 95% of North America. So reaching real people requires our devices to adapt to different body shapes, and the variability in the human body is an often overlooked area. So while wearables can sometimes successfully incorporate more traditional apparel methods like adjustability, stretch, and size categories, to accommodate population variability, traditional apparel does not have the fit requirements that wearables do, right? So we buy ready-to-wear garments. We don't buy custom garments, and we're okay with our clothing being a little big here and there, fitting each other a little differently. The consequences are very low. But wearables, on the other hand, need to maintain close mechanical coupling to the wearer to be successful. For example, if I embed actuators into a wearable and it's too big on me, the consequence is that the actuators are not going to make contact with the body and it's not going to be a successful haptic, right? As another example, if bend sensors don't land on a joint, the device won't sense pose. So the big question is, how can we mechanically fit such a wide range of bodies while maintaining mechanical coupling? It's a really huge problem and a new problem for tech. These are definitely not easy problems to solve. They require real soft-wearable systems research focus. They require different approaches across many different research areas and fields. So I'm excited to be connecting with others to motivate these areas of work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel, for those perspectives. Let's transition straight into our second speaker, Mark Stroley. So as we get Mark's slides, Mark is a program presenter at Michigan State University School of Human Resources and Labor Relations. He was previously a representative and administrative assistant to the president of the United Auto Workers in Detroit, Michigan. He has a master's in labor relations and human resources from the Michigan State University School of Human Resources and Labor Relations. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Thank you for the opportunity, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. The slide you see is the General Motors Lansing Delta plant, and I'll be using this today as sort of a case study in clothing in factories. This is General Motors' newest plant that was built in the United States. And its first vehicle rolled off the line in 2006. Since then, they're closing in on about 4 million vehicles built. There are 3,000 workers here on 3 shifts, and there are 3 main production departments that we're going to look at. Body shop that has a contiguous stamping plant, paint department, and the general assembly. There's a lot at stake for these plants to be successful for the local communities. They make about 50 vehicles per hour on 3 shifts with an average sales price of about $50,000 per vehicle. So if everything goes right in a day, they contribute about $60 million in revenue to the company. And there's also the multiplier effect. For every job inside the plant, there are 6 to 9 created on the outside, depending on the complexity of the vehicle we're building at any one time, plus the good wages that auto workers spend in the community. The role of clothing is kind of interesting. I was on the launch committee for this particular plant, and there was a big debate over clothing and what we should wear and how how stringent we should be in the enforcement. The goal of clothing is really twofold. One is to protect workers from injury. The other is to protect the vehicles from defects. And there's a general dress code if you come here as a visitor, and it's kind of telling. There's no skirts, dresses. I'd add kilts as well. If you have long hair, it must be back and tied. Shoes have to be closed, toed, and heeled, and leather is also preferred. If you can't meet any one of those 3 things, you won't be allowed on the shop floor. So if we could have the next slide, please. This is the body shop and stamping area. What happens here is in the stamping, large presses press steel into panels. Those are welded together, and then the swinging metal is attached, which are the hood, the doors, and in this case, the rear gate. You look at this picture, and there's a fair amount going on here. You see the green sleeves that they're wearing. Those are made of Kevlar. There's lots of sharp metal in the body shop, and these Kevlar sleeves protect people against cuts. And then if you look at the guy on the left, you see a little bow behind him there because he's wearing an apron. He comes in his street clothes and puts on the apron because the steel often has a little light oil, and if it gets over your clothes, it's kind of a drag. And everybody wears gloves in the body shop as well. So these folks are covered from basically neck to toe with substantial shoes as part of what they wear as their uniform. So if we could go next to the paint shop. The paint shop is kind of an interesting place. It's the smallest department people-wise, but as soon as you start working there, they hand you a list of things that you cannot wear. It's a contaminant list. So it has deodorants, lotions, perfumes, aftershaves, all these things that you can't use by brand because they create defects in the paint that could lead to rust. So people come into this department, they go into a locker room and they change clothes and they wear these blue coveralls because the other problem with paint is that it's done in a clean room. And synthetic fabrics are used in these coveralls. You don't want any cotton. You don't want any dust or dirt, because if that gets in the car, it shows up in the paint job and can cost you sales. And the other thing you need to know about the paint shop, it's hot. The paint ovens are there. It's a great place to work in the wintertime in Michigan. It's not so great in the summertime because it can get kind of toasty there as well. So we'll take a look at General Assembly next. General Assembly is the biggest department. People here are in their street clothes. You see that these folks have hats because they're working on the underside of the car and you don't want to get your hair caught in the car. They basically are wearing t-shirts and jeans. No buttons. Buttons are a problem. You have to cover up rings and watches with protectors as well. Also, belts are not good. And this is the department that really is going to probably have a significant number of cobots in the future. Right now, most of the robotics in the plant is behind a fence and is locked out. Now, I could show you material and skilled trades. Material, though, just had a deal where now driverless vehicles are delivering. They solved the last 5 feet, and they can actually take material from a truck to an operator and have it put on the car. And skilled trades are another ones who fix the machinery. They wear cotton coveralls. They usually change their clothes and take a shower after they're done. So that's what it looks like inside an auto assembly plant.
Thank you, Mark. Certainly gives the engineers in the calls like some interesting design constraints and challenges. Let's transition now to our third speaker, Alan Asbeck. So Alan is an associate professor at Virginia Tech and chief science officer at Element Exo Incorporated. His research centers on building human assistance devices and on understanding how to make them work most effectively with the body. His goal is to help people regain capabilities they have lost or enable people to perform feats that were not previously possible. His company, Element Exo, designs and develops lightweight and approachable exoskeletons that make lifting and bending easier while reducing the risks of overuse injuries for workers who perform repetitive lifting tasks. With that, I'll hand it over to Alan.
Thank you. All right, so I just have a few slides. So yeah, 2 hats here, the Virginia Tech hat and the Element Exo hat. And let's see if this works. There we go. So in my lab, we make a lot of exoskeletons for back support, arm support, walking assistance, elbow assistance, knee assistance. And then previously, as a postdoc, I made soft exosuits with Harvard. So I'm very familiar with and interested in the functioning with motors and stuff like that. And then for Element Exo, this basically is a progression from the lab where it is now a commercial product. So what makes a good wearable? I think that most people prefer normal forces on most of their body. And these are what we feel under basically all circumstances in everyday life. When you're sitting in a chair, even compression socks, these are all squeezing you. Whereas if there is shear force, this, I think, primarily occurs on your hands and feet, at least for large shear forces. And if you are sitting at an angle or similar experience where there's a shear force on another part of your body, that tends to be less comfortable. So when we're using textiles with normal forces and shear forces, there we go. It turns out when you have shear forces, they move quite a lot on your body. And this can be less comfortable, and really in practice, it means the peak forces are limited. So if you have a wearable, ideally you would have forces in the normal direction. So as for textiles, textiles only can create tensile forces. They can't create moments. And so how do you create normal forces with textiles? Well, in my lab, and this is, I think, the only solution, you have to have some sort of structure or frame, like all these metal pieces everywhere, that can support moments. Then you can put the textiles, around them or supported by them. Another reason why that's important to have normal forces is if you have a soft exosuit or something with shear forces, they move on the body. Like here, You can see the suit is being pulled down at the bottom, and it's shifting back and forth over the person. And this has the potential for chafing, but also increases the required motor power quite a lot just because of this extra displacement. And so relatedly, humans don't really like carrying a lot of weight. It's something that you try to minimize, especially if you're going to wear this thing every day. But if you need to have high torque and high speed, especially with a lot of extra displacement from an exosystem, that requires a large motor and battery, and these are really heavy. So how do we minimize these? So working with textiles are kind of a weird material. They actually have different properties depending on how you stretch them. If you're pulling them along the threads, it'll stretch less than if you pull them at this other angle. And so here's webbing, which is a lot stiffer. So you can do some things to orient textiles in certain ways, and this is work actually with Diana, another panelist at Harvard, to reduce the stretch in certain areas and try and minimize that displacement over the body. But it's still tough, and it's still going to happen. Another point would be if you have pressure points with a lot of normal force even at a small place, that is less comfortable. And if you have an exoskeleton and you have small pads or small areas of contact with the body, this will push in significantly and create discomfort as well. So in summary, basically what we want to have is something that applies mostly normal force with wide areas of contact, is really light, can be loose most of the time, otherwise it creates a lot of heat buildup, allows for natural motion, is unrestrictive. And so some challenges are have textiles support large moments when desired, if possible, that could maybe be switchable, or have textiles switch between rigid and flexible, even for pushing normal to the body, have textiles produce active pooling. And then just to wrap up, with the element exoskeleton, we actually tried to incorporate all these properties. It does create normal force instead of shear, which actually enables it to be a lot stronger than other exoskeletons. It's lightweight, loose fitting until loaded. You can keep the pads loose fitting, and it's comfortable. And that's the end.
All right, thank you so much, Alan. Let's transition now to our final speaker, Diana Wagner-Elenoff. So Diana is a principal soft goods designer and developer at Zoll Cardiac Management Solutions. Her role within R&D is to support existing production and future development of the Zoll LifeVest. The LifeVest is a wearable defibrillator prescribed to patients at risk of sudden cardiac death. It's designed to detect certain life-threatening rapid heart rhythms and automatically deliver a treatment to save a patient's life. Diana works on garment designs that balance patient comfort with device function in equal measure. She was previously director of apparel innovation at 99 Degrees, a domestic apparel manufacturer, where she worked with customers on wearable tech products that required integrated hardware and electronics and scalable solutions for manufacturing. Thanks for joining us, Diana.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to participate in this and hoping that I can offer a little bit of a different perspective navigating some of the challenges that I've observed throughout my career. So I started in early stage high-risk research in wearable assistive technologies and soft robotics, as Alan alluded to. We used to work together. So through engineering research and development in the biodesign lab at Harvard and the Peace Institute. But my background is in industrial design with a specific interest in textiles and apparel. So when I joined this research, one of the things that became really clear to me literally from day one was the resources, right? The actual materials and machinery to work with textiles. So to contribute to this groundbreaking research, which it really is, and collaborating on the design, testing soft exoskeletons on real people, my role would look through a combined lens, right? Taking textiles, apparel, and industrial design to work collaboratively. So literally bringing in the materials, the equipment, the design language, and the process to collaborate on hands-on with engineers, biomechanicists, and clinical collaborators that are needed to solve these really interesting challenges. So as a lover of machinery and production, as a product designer, like how it's made, like the videos from this experience, I was from sorry, from this experience, one piece became really interesting to me, being a lover of all things that are produced, and that is scale. So this is the one thing that was always at the forefront of my thinking in collaborating on these types of designs in wearable technology. So asking these types of questions: how will this scale? Are there factories that can work with textiles and electronics? Can this be made? Where will it be made? Will it be cost effective? Can it be made with current industry standards and the state of the art? And do we need to build new capabilities to manufacture these ideas at scale? So you'll hear me say scale a lot. After many exciting years in research, I was ready to think about these questions outside the lab. So I was really fortunate to move into the role as the director of apparel innovation at an American apparel manufacturer, so 99 Degrees in Massachusetts. So we focused on knitwear, and so specifically cut and sew, where I know a lot of the technologies that you all are, sorry, my phone's ringing. A lot of the technologies that you all are experimenting with are using digital technologies. We focus specifically on cut and sew. So our factory had a special interest in developing small lines of production. So to look at these exact questions for wearable technologies, we were helping to define manufacturing capabilities stateside. So I got to help with a lot of companies from Fortune 500 to startups working on these emerging technologies. So some of the specific challenges we faced were, in fact, scale. So meeting the needs of small batch production, which are very low volumes, right? We're talking hundreds of units, not thousands of units when you're starting out. We had to make it cost effective for both the consumer and the factory. So another challenge that was really aligning with these resources at the factory is the various levels of electronics integration. Was this done in-house or like during the production process, or was this technology and product designed in a way that components could be made in separate channels of manufacturing and then come together later? So the key thing to think about here is the design for manufacturing, the factory capability, and the cost, in addition to scale. So unfortunately, our factory closed in 2023, but I moved on to join one of our customers, and that is Zoll. So combining the skill sets from my prior roles in functional apparel design and manufacturing, as was mentioned in the intro, we produce a wearable defibrillator. So the Life Vest has had about 20 plus years of use on the market, and we've protected over 1 million lives. So it's a knit garment, and it holds ECGs and therapy electrodes directly on the skin. So as a class 3 medical device, we have to meet really strict biocompatibility requirements. For example, all materials must be compliant with long-term intact skin, and that's just one of many biocompatibility requirements that we have to meet that are critical in all of the materials used. So designing this type of use case, the most critical element is of course the patient. So are they receiving the appropriate treatment, which of course requires very specific conditions to work, as Rachel described. Like, these things aren't just magic, right? They have to align very specifically to the body. And are they comfortable? Meaning, will they be used? Will the device be used properly? And will it be compliant with use? Exactly as Alan said, right? People aren't going to wear it if it isn't comfortable. So these critical elements are often in complete opposition. And I think we can all acknowledge that it's hard. So in addition to these points, right, and this kind of unique challenge, one of the things that I face in my current role is our device is not voluntary. It's not used on an as needed basis. It's prescribed as a life-saving device. So that means it's worn 24/7, right? You don't know when you might need this type of assistance. So typically the device is worn for 3 to 6 months at a time. So with 24/7 wear outside of showering, that's a lot of time, and that's on a very wide range of the population, right? Anybody could be at risk of this this type of need and might be prescribed this type of device. So with these types of challenges, it's not limited to the scope of medical devices for sure. So I would really urge you all to think about how devices can be transparent, right? Transparent to the wearer. So where this is likely not entirely possible, as Rachel was describing, like literally scaling these types of technologies fundamentally, right, in the way they work, not necessarily the way they're made, can be really challenging. And then, of course, to speak, this is so perfect to what Alan was saying, is like, we need them to be lightweight, right? We need them to be very low profile, and we need them to be unobtrusive to the wearer. So, and this all, of course, it needs to fall into the category of being able to scale. So that's all for me.
Well, thank you so much, Diana, and thanks to all of our panelists for sharing your perspectives on this topic. So we're going to move to the Q&A portion of the webinar, and we'll start with some questions that are prepared, and that will give our audience members some time to think of and enter their own questions using the Q&A function. So I'm going to start with maybe thinking big and dreaming. So I'll pose the question to the whole panel, and you can just indicate if you'd like to answer. So what's your dream wish list for the properties and capabilities of an ideal fabric-based wearable? If you could have anything, what capabilities and properties would you wish for? And we'll start with Rachel.
Yeah, I think maybe echoing Alan here a little bit, like I'd like to see more textiles with material intelligence to improve coupling with the body. So this could be textile-based materials that have novel stiffness properties, so engineered at precise strain ranges, so that as a device is donned and used, it's just at the stiffness that you want, exactly when it's needed. Also, mechanically actuatable textiles that can be controlled in stiffness or dimension for dynamic fitting or even haptics. This is an area where actuation is not easily embedded into textiles because these devices have to be really low form factor. So actuation solutions that are really low form factor are things like shape memory alloys or polymers or dielectric elastomers that have real body interface concerns in terms of like heat or voltage. So we really need more realistic actuation methods to control material properties on the wear that are not encumbering, so really low volume for things like hands and the wrist.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. Any other comments or yeah, Mark?
I would hope that as auto workers are wearing more devices and working next to robots, that we wouldn't just focus on the sensors and the robots, that perhaps we could design stuff that would also monitor the health of the auto worker as well. And that way we could reduce long-term injuries, perhaps like carpal tunnel, et cetera, and also improve the health of the workforce.
Yeah, it's a great perspective. I wonder, just kind of playing off this a little bit, if you all could speak to the need for multifunctional components. So, can we think about each of these, sensing and actuating and monitoring independently, or to what extent do we really need to be thinking about integrating functions across components? If anybody wants to take that
one. It could be done separately. Often the place where you need the actuation is a little different than the place where you need the sensing, or especially if we're talking about textiles, you can add layers. And so maybe there's like an actuation layer and then a sensing layer underneath. The other thing related to sensing is that usually if you have to measure something, you need a chip, and it's on a tiny circuit board. And so that is going to be rigid and not flexible like the rest of the fabric, unless we spend, people are working on that, but it's complicated. And so, if you have these rigid elements, you need to kind of design them in spots where it won't matter so much.
I think I want to jump back to Mark's comment about this opportunity for wearables in the workplace for monitoring worker health and safety. I would pose maybe to Mark and to others, what do you see as the biggest challenges to people successfully using wearable devices in the workplace? Maybe what's different about training versus actual execution of the tasks that they're charged with?
Usually you get the best outcome if you can involve some people who will actually be using this stuff in the design phase. And if you can do that and they have a voice in the thing, then the acceptance of the new devices, whatever they might be, is a lot better.
It's a great point.
I can talk about it a little bit through the Element Exo hat. So it needs to look good. We had an early version that people did not like the look of, and just people wouldn't wear it at all based on that, or not everybody, but some people. The weight is really a big thing. If you're wearing something around all day, and especially if it's uncomfortable in some way, like people have a sort of people don't even want to wear hard hats or like safety goggles or stuff, which are really going to help them, you know, and they know it works, and they've probably seen somebody get injured, you know, if they don't have one or something. Any sort of wearable is like a whole nother thing on top of that, where it's got to be, you know, so like nice looking and just normal that people are willing to do it.
Yeah, I would certainly echo that in terms of fit, right? There's, if you're talking about factory workers, right, that could mean a very diverse segment of the population. And to the points of, you know, would they like it? Would they want to wear it because they like it, or do they need it? Could be in contradiction, right? Because there isn't another option. And I think that's one of the big differences with when we think about the way that we wear our clothing today, right? We have a choice in it. And that becomes pretty challenging if something is going to override that choice that's made. And then if it is made for you, such as a uniform, right? Is it going to be comfortable enough? Is it going to fit well enough, right, to perform the way it needs to, but also kind of seamlessly integrate into what's required? And those challenges are a bit less on the engineering and, you know, hardware, not to say less, but you know, they're a separate challenge from that sort of human adaptation of sort of wanting to experience this device. So those human factor challenges are very real.
Definitely. So I want to kind of go back to this wish list and dreaming. A good number of members of our audience and even the group of us who've gotten together to talk about this topic are researchers. So what do you think are things that might be hard to do in practice, where you think that academics working on materials, robotics, and human performance really have the potential to contribute? And maybe I'll kick that one to Diana first.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that really comes to mind and has become a lot more potent in my recent work is this duration of wear, right? Thinking about designing sort of previous technologies, they're used in a specific use case that maybe is the workplace, right? So that's a very limited number of hours with real constraints, like Alan said, you know, weight and discomfort and things like that. But wearing something 24/7 for 3 to 6 months is a very particular use case. And I don't think it goes beyond some of the scope of other products that have been mentioned here, because, you know, constant monitoring, healthcare, things like that would require those types of use cases. So that biocompatibility, but thinking of it more holistically with the way that our biology works to the way that the technology works, is something that is certainly an emerging research capability that continuing to think in that lens of, you know, how can something be on the skin, close to skin, or really, you know, keeping the skin from breathing for long periods of time be possible? Because that level of comfort, I think, in some ways can surpass some of the other challenges that we can navigate in design of sort of, you know, choosing different fabrics or choosing different fit. It's really how are the materials chosen going to work with the biology of the person?
Right.
I could add, I think one area where I'd like to see more research advances is in soft system design tools, right? So we can design better and design coupling to the body better if we have more advanced tools to be able to predict how a given design is going to interface with the body and maybe even wide ranges of the population. And there's a real limitation here in terms of textile mechanical properties in these simulation tools, right? So textiles are mechanically anisotropic. As Alan mentioned, they have different properties in bending and tension and compression. And this means that textile material models don't easily plug into simulation tools. So when we're trying to simulate complex stack ups, right, where you've got multi-materials and series and parallels configurations, like how do you include textiles in that complex simulation? Right now, there's not a great solution, right? There are papers on yarn level simulations, which also don't easily plug into these system level simulations. So could we develop like databases of textile material models that could be available to the research community to allow us to incorporate textiles into these soft system simulations and also create better designs to be able to move faster and do less kind of prototyping that for more complex devices becomes really expensive, resource intensive, and time consuming. So how do we get to the right design faster?
Right. So I'm going to ask one more question that's prepared and then go to some audience questions. So one of the things that we've been discussing related to this is for future industry of smart assistive fabrics, what kind of workforce development is needed? What kind of skills and training do we really need to equip our next generation workforce that's going to be, producing and deploying these technologies and assistive fabrics? Maybe there's a little bit alluding there to like prototyping and the need for mechanics and material modeling. I don't know if there's anybody who wants to jump at this one.
Yeah, I can jump in really from the industry perspective. These were some of the challenges we faced and, worked really closely with the state government to really understand how these challenges could be met, knowing that a workforce needs to be built, right? And that starts K-12, right? It doesn't start later than that. So there's, I think those sort of workforce development programs that are looking at advanced technologies are very useful, but they're quite diverse, right? There's a lot of different understanding of materials and training that go into that sometimes will couple together. For example, electronics and textiles, right? Those are two discretely different skill sets and capabilities, and how can we merge those in learning environments where that would be possible? I think the other arm to that we faced, and I repetitively alluded to in my presentation, was it's very challenging to produce things that meet industry scale, right, are scalable, but with a very small number of them. And so that starts with research, right? Understanding a technology that is going to mirror capabilities at scale, but with very small production, lab scale, right? Mm-hmm. But there's also there's a gap in that sort of somewhere between lab scale and small scale production that would be necessary in industry, right? There's a gap that's not met, right? A lab can do really interesting demonstrations and proof of concepts at a certain scale, and manufacturing very well, produces demonstrating at scale, but there's that in between that becomes really challenging. And one of the notable reasons it's challenging is time and money, not capability. And so that's one of the big things that we would see in terms of where companies could have success or not, was if they can meet the requirements that are needed to sort of support this intermediary of production.
Go from the academic perspective. I think basically, if there are research dollars, then we will train students in all these different areas of, mechanical engineering, material science, electronics, like all those. From the kind of system level textiles design, I personally feel like rapid prototyping and just trying things out is a really important part of the process because people are so different. It is a weird material that both the textiles, that they have forces but not moments, and also people are squishy in weird ways that you wouldn't expect, and people are in all different shapes and sizes, like really, really very different than and one thing won't work on another. And so you kind of just have to try it and get a whole bunch of people to try it on and say, okay, this worked, this didn't work, how can we change it, and rapidly iterate from there. And so training people in those procedures would be helpful.
So let me transition to taking some questions from our audience members. So I'll start with a question from Xiaomeng Feng. So there are many textile-based wearable devices that have been developed and investigated. However, we've not seen many of them become products coming to the real-life application. Many factors attribute to this challenge. What do you think is the key reason, and how do we deal with it to accelerate the process to make them realizable and scalable products? Maybe I'll stick Alan on this one since he has been working to bring a product to market.
Yeah, so this is tricky. I think the thing, whenever you have a product, there's this, we have research, and then there's this valley of death where it's really hard to get it to be something that a lot of people scale up and buy. And the tricky thing there is figuring out what is the people who have a really compelling need for that product. And that is, the fundamental question for any new company, new product. It really depends on the specific application. A lot of companies feel like some things are optional if you're selling business to business. Consumers also, may be like, I don't really need it unless they like want it somehow. And so figuring out how to, find the people who really want it is the trouble.
Right. Thank you. I'm going to pose a question to Mark. This is in the backdoor chat, not in the Q&A, in case you're wondering. But a really great question. What do you think are the trade-offs among cobots, which are collaborative robots that people work with and physically interact with, autonomous robots, and assistive wearable devices to be used in the types of activities you showed, say, at the automotive plant, at the GM plant?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that cobots it's like a double-edged sword in a way, because they could make jobs easier for auto workers, and they'd be less likely to wear out their bodies over time if the robots did a lot of the heavy lifting and bending and so on. But then there's also the other side that says, can we completely replace the worker? And if that's the goal, then you're going to get resistance to adoption of new technologies. And that's when people won't, they'll find a reason for it not to work instead of a reason for it to work. And so that's the careful dance that's going to have to be done here as these new technologies are introduced. And the number of auto workers is probably going to decline over the next decade. If it's very severe, there'll be a lot of resistance if it's done too quickly. That's another way that people have to understand that this is going to help them in the long run. There has to be something in it for them.
Yeah, thanks so much for those perspectives. I'll take another question from the Q&A. It's a little long, but I think there's a lot of interesting points in here. So what is one thing that active clothing could do to make people interested in actually using it? Obviously, we need to minimize weight and bulk and meet industrial safety requirements, be low cost, but on a focus on the features or functionality, what do you think should be targeted in the near future or maybe over the long term? And then the question goes on. I think everybody can see it in the perhaps. For example, there's specific types of workplace tasks that are problematic and require human workers where this type of technology could help, or are there safety features that might be beneficial, like protecting the body against some unusual dangerous event? What's going to make people want these fabrics and active clothing?
I think, again, if there can be partnerships between companies and researchers where you could pinpoint areas where people have been hurt and see if there's some adaptive clothing situation that could help out, that would be a great thing to happen. I think a lot of this comes down to real world applications, and if you can develop some of those opportunities, there certainly seems to be a lot of room here. And I think, again, it's another factor that is important about this is that people used to retire from auto plants after they had 30 years in and they got a defined benefit pension. That's no longer going to be true in the future, and people are going to be older when they work in these factories, more susceptible to long-term injuries. So that's not good for either the company or the worker.
I would say, like, making things, right, in general. So producing things is an inherently repetitive task, right? You're doing the same thing over and over again, which is why we go to things like machinery, but that's still monitored and operated by people. So that repetitive task, produces injury, which is one of the things that this types of devices are keying into, because you don't want to take away those movements from the person, right? They need a benefit from it in some ways, but you don't want them to be injured by it. And I think that balance of that assistive technology, right, that's not overriding the person or the need for the person or the use of the person, but working harmoniously, not just with the person using machinery, but also being assisted by machinery, is somewhere where you can realistically see a need. So manufacturing, right, we know that we move people around, right, to reduce these types of injuries, right, that they're not doing the same repetitive task every day. They do a different task every day so that they're not creating injury. But you compound that with the 30 years that Mark alluded to, you're still causing injury, right? So how do we help the worker in the process?
I can go. The two applications where exoskeletons have been widely adopted so far are in auto manufacturing, when your arms are overhead, and there's like 10 different arm exoskeleton companies on the market because people just get tired. And then picking up heavy things. And basically, if you have to stay bent over, even working over a manufacturing line, your back is going to get sore. And it's some things are automatable inside factories, but at great expense. Most of the time, it's cheaper just to and just better because people are flexible, just to give the person a little tool to help.
Oh, thank you. I'll go to another question, and maybe I'll queue up Rachel to answer this one because of a question she answered earlier. So, can you speak a little bit about maybe the opportunities or advantages of different textile structures for wearables? So we've heard about cut and sew. We've also talked a little bit about knits and how the properties can be anisotropic, and then also the potential for printed electronics. So, maybe what advantages do you see for these structures in the nearer term? Maybe not the vision for the suit, the suit we all dream of, but nearer term.
Yeah, so I mean, textile structures are so cool because you can take a material that's otherwise got one set of properties, like let's say it's inextensible, and then you can structure it by twisting it into yarns and then creating different entanglement patterns, and then you can create very particular properties just from that structuring alone. Different types of structures, you can get strategic behaviors in different directions. You can get different compression capabilities. So there's a lot of opportunity with the textile structure to manipulate and tune mechanical properties in a particular direction. If you add a smart material on top of that, right, then you can tune actuation capabilities, you can tune the sensing response. So textiles really offer this huge opportunity for flexibility of mechanical properties. And I think we're starting to exploit that in different areas, but I think there's a lot of capability that we haven't quite tapped into because we're not leveraging the full structure.
Right. So one of the things that we've talked about a bit here is sort of the user acceptance of these wearables and for augmenting performance. And a lot of times evaluation of the benefit of these wearables is done through, you put the assistive device on the person and you look at the person's performance. And maybe, so a question from David Bertram in the audience is, how can we engage with clothing designers and clothing manufacturers as part of the evaluation process for wearables? What might be some opportunities for us researchers that are trying to develop these products to partner in thinking about evaluation?
I would actually encourage engagement earlier, right? I think sometimes that is a miss where the kind of textile apparel side gets engaged at the end of the process. But like I was mentioning about textile structuring, right? There are all of these abilities to design devices, electronics, different pieces of hardware for better compatibility by leveraging principles of textile science and also apparel design. So I think engaging in cross-disciplinary discussion at the beginning is going to bring your device closer to where you want it to be in terms of human compatibility.
I would extend that to not just discussion, but part of the team, right? I think it's an ongoing process that it's not a limited, as Rachel was alluding to, like it's something that can happen at the end, right? Like we designed this great technology, now let's make it a t-shirt, right? That's not exactly how it works, especially with the way we're thinking about, the future of textiles, right? That they're smart in the same ways that that we expect the mechanical system to be, but that needs to be harmonious with the materials. So that's the entire process, right? That's not just a one step. It's not one conversation, right? It's really understanding the collaboration between those disciplines throughout the process, and to just to highlight again the differences in those materials, I think is addressed here very clearly, but the differences in those manufacturing processes, as we expect all of these ideas to scale, are very real to the process, and it's not always possible that every concept will be able to vertically, integrate and build their own manufacturing capabilities, but they have to fit within the ecosystem of manufacturers that exist in the world today. So that is a challenge that will be solved in many, many myriad ways, but is part of the process.
So we're nearing the end. We've got about 6 minutes until the top of the hour. So I want to make sure that I give our panelists an opportunity to share any thoughts or reflections on the conversation that we've had today. So I'll just give you the opportunity to speak up. Mark.
I've enjoyed listening to people talk about the future and the way you do it. And I believe that there's a chance here for a lot of good things to happen in the future. The only thing, my biggest fear is that it will be done in a way that doesn't involve, I'm always hopeful that it's from a bottom-up situation and not necessarily imposed in a top-down situation. But it's clear that the technology can really do great things, and I hope it makes workplaces like the one that a lot of people spend time in better. And I think that's the goal of everybody I've heard today.
Other thoughts or reflections? I've got more great questions. I can go to the Q&A if everybody is just stunned and not sure what to say.
I think it's a very encouraging conversation, right? This is evidence that these things are happening, right? This work is being done, and these capabilities are being made, and people are starting to adopt these types of technologies, and that is happening, and it will continue, right? That it doesn't seem as far off as we may have. As we may be imagining, right? It is being done and will continue to progress.
I guess my take is this is fantastic. The main ingredient that I see is being needed is sort of research funding. And for that, I think you need champions either at private companies or in the government to be like, hey, this is something I want to push for, and then it'll get there. Yeah, lots of good ideas here though.
I think there's been a clear theme of, engagement of stakeholders, right? Both the end users who might benefit from like wearable assistive fabrics, and also the manufacturers on the development side, all through the deployment and evaluation side as well. So I'm gonna bring us to a little bit of closure, because I know we're gonna get turned off right at noon. So to the audience, first, thank you. There are some really great questions that have been brought up, and I couldn't address them all. So hopefully in our future conversations, we'll be able to touch on some of those. I also want to give my thanks to our panelists today. So Diana, and Alan, Mark, and Rachel. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your unique perspectives and experiences as those seeing like the environments in which we want to deploy these devices, but also thinking, futuristic to how these wearables can augment virtual and augmented reality experiences as well. So thank you so much. In a few days, the recording of today's webinar will be posted. And the link has been shared in the chat. At that link, you can also find information about the third webinar in our series. Our third webinar will take place next Friday on April 25th. It'll be at a different time. So it'll be at 3 p.m. Eastern. And the topic next week will be wearables and assistive fabrics for sports, space, and recovery. So hopefully that's enough of a teaser to get you to tune in next week. The link is there, and you'll be able to find the recordings from previous webinars as well, and information about how to register for those future events. So once again, I'll thank our audience members for your engagement, and our panelists for their great insights that they've shared with us today. And I hope that everyone will join us again next week.